So I'm here to talk about performance management conversations. And first I'll introduce myself. I'm Cindy. Danny already mentioned a little bit about me. I'm the Chief People Officer at Policygenius. And I grew up in a small town in Ohio as a transracial adoptee. And my way of figuring out how to best integrate and fit in was to observe behaviors of others. And then eventually it turned into something much bigger. And now I'm in the people space. So it's a little bit about me. I work at Policygenius. We were founded in 2014. We're an online insurance marketplace and brokerage. We're based in New York, and we're building another headquarters in Durham, North Carolina. We're about 300 employees, and we've helped about more than 30 million shoppers look for insurance. So why am I here? I was asked to talk about something related to performance management. And before I get to some of the tactical stuff, which I think will be most useful for folks in the room, I do want to give a little bit of the quick before the dirty. So there's going to be a bunch of whys behind why we get to the tactical. So first I'm going to start with some people stats. I'll just share this first one. So this is from an article written up by Carta. But the average tenure at startups is 2 years. That's pretty short. Thinking about all the work that we put into building up talent and the infrastructure at our companies. By show of, or anybody in the room, what do you think the average tenure is at non-startups in the US? You can shout out. 4 to 5 years. Did you read this article? Okay. It's 4 to 5. Okay, there we go. So it's 4 to 5 years. So we're already working with 50% less tenure than the average industry worker. This next chart, you probably can't read the small print, but that blue line shows the likelihood of continuous employment over time at a company, and then that black line shows voluntary attrition, and then the green line shows involuntary attrition. So one thing that you can see is that they're working against each other over time. And at the 1 year mark, which is usually, it's no surprise at the 1 year mark, when the 1 year cliff for typical equity structure ends, you see an increase in voluntary attrition. And then at the 4 year mark, which is how equity plans are usually structured and people are fully vested, you'll start to see that line overlap with continuous employment. So we've got this conundrum working against us at startups. And one thing I want to talk about is if we already know that we'll only have people, or the odds are against us at the 2 year mark, then the likelihood of people in this room, raise your hands if you're founders or running a startup. All right, the likelihood of you employing some of the same individuals that other employers have employed is very high because of that turnover rate. So if you think about that working against us, and then we refer back to what David was talking about, have you ever experienced, had an employee or you've been one yourself where you've been triggered by something and you overreact or you blow up and it reminds you of something from before? Yes, I think we've all been there, we've experienced that. That might be a person who's referred to as a toxic employee. So what we're talking about is if we're not treating our employees well and we're not focused on purpose, which if research shows that today's workforce is focused on purposeful driven work, then if we're not focused on those things, then we are already working against the 2 year mark and we're not treating people well. So if you think about that and we don't focus enough on performance and giving people purpose at work, then we are just passing around that shit over and over and over again, and that cultural debt is passed around in the ecosystem. So if you think about that recycling, it's a really bad place to be, and we already have the odds against us, even if we're a brand new company. So it would be in our best interest if we focused on treating our employees well, giving them purpose-driven work, so then at some point maybe they'll come back to us or we'll get some other company's employees, so we're helping each other. So now I'm going to move into some strategic stuff, and I promise I'll get to some tactical things. But one thing we use at Policygenius is a flywheel strategy. So if you read Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, anybody heard of that? Okay, he references a framework called flywheel strategy, and it's basically a concept where you put effort in, and then over time it builds momentum and more and more and more, and then it starts to run itself. So it's a great way of thinking about how to apply strategy in business because it can serve as a force multiplier for the company. So if you think about how you can apply flywheel strategy to the people space, then it's pretty basic. This is what it looks like. You've got hiring and retention. Too often than not, companies are focused only on hiring, and maybe we need to because of the 2-year attrition rate, but if you're only focused on hiring, then all you can do is hire, and then there's more churn there. So the other side of this is focusing on retention, and one good way to get there is to focus on performance and purpose. So if you think about the flywheel and drill down a little bit, there's a talent model that I reference at work, and that serves as the flywheel for our people strategy. There's nothing groundbreaking here, but it just lays it out in a digestible way over time. And if you think about hiring not as a means to an end, not getting just having butts in a seat, but you think about that as the start of somebody's experience at your company, with continuity, you can tie everything together. If you've ever heard of an employee, you've been subject to an experience where you applied for a job online, you interviewed, and then you joined a company, you're like, what the hell did I just join? That wasn't the role I interviewed for. This is not anything that I thought it was. You're already not going to trust the company. So if you think about being really strategic with your hiring and having that flow into how you think about performance expectations, that can help tremendously, and you're already starting to build trust. And onboarding is really critical too, because the more you put into that, you're setting people up for success and they can hit the ground running more quickly. So I won't get into all of these things, and again, I promise there's a goal here. One other thing I'm going to reference before we dive into some tactical stuff is thinking about the core. So if we go back to this talent model, you could carry out all of these things, but if there's no purpose behind it, it's gonna fall flat. You won't believe it, and then it's really hard to disseminate any type of vision to your employees. So if you think about the core, it's really important to understand what your company's mission is. You wouldn't just go out and throw spaghetti at the wall to see if it sticks when you're dealing with your client base. Your employees, you'd want to treat like your employees too, so you think about how you can attract, retain, and engage them. It's the same logic. So think about what your company's mission is, what your value proposition is for your employees. It might be different than your outward-facing brand with clients, but it's really important to understand what that looks like so you can put your stamp on it, and then everybody is driving toward that same vision, and then it becomes purposeful. So you get out what you put in. So you've got people strategy, and if you can come up with the people strategy first as its foundation, then all of the output is just the execution of it. And that's where recruiting, people operations, and people experience come into play. So that's the concept, and you can hit performance zones. So on the recruiting side, that can create capacity for your teams. It can create growth opportunities, whether it's internally for people who are becoming new managers, or it could be somebody from outside who's looking for a step-up opportunity, and they're getting that growth opportunity. The people operations side, it's more around performance expectations and the management side. And then people experience is around culture, and it's around community building and making sure that everything ties together. So that's where you can hit the performance zone, but it's all those things in aggregate that can create a great and purposeful experience for employees. So now we're getting to the tactical, and I think this is a fantastic drill down to what David was talking about on how you can very nicely get rid of underperforming employees. This is what we share with our managers. There's nothing groundbreaking here, but it can be really helpful if you need to break down the topic. So there are 3 pillars here, and this is what managers are dealing with. You're dealing, or a leader, you're dealing with the company's goals, you're dealing with an individual's goals, and you're dealing with role expectations and performance. So if you think about the overlap of those 3 pillars, then that's the sweet spot, but those things can change over time. Your company's goals may change, they might be longer tailed. An individual's goals could change at whatever pace their goals are moving and how quickly they're meeting them, and then role expectations and performance are things you can put into place to serve as guiding lights for people. The overlap of any of these 2 pillars is where certain elements come into play. So the overlap of the company's goals and individuals' goals is where engagement and strategic planning comes into play for the company. The overlap of individual goals with role expectations and performance is where management and coaching comes into play. And then company goals relative to role expectations and performance is how you think about hiring and your organizational design and talent management. So this requires all constant communication and transparency over time, but those are the three things that you're dealing with as a leader, so why not share those with your employees? So if we were to practically apply this concept, if somebody came to me and said, Cindy, I want to be a pastry chef at Policygenius, and I'm the manager, I might say, okay, that's one of your goals. So let's sit down and talk about how you're performing in your role and what's expected out of it. And we have skill development rubrics that are not checklists, nor are they ladders per se. It just helps set expectations on how we're measuring performance. We'll reference that, and then I'll share out what the company's goals are to see if pastry chef is a possibility. Then we're having a very honest conversation around whether that's going to work or not, and if their aspirations align with what we're doing at Policygenius. So this is a great way to counsel somebody to leave. It's also a great way to dig in and just have really purposeful performance development conversations with people to get them really inspired to do more. So this can really open up doors either way for somebody, but it's very different than if somebody came to me and said, Cindy, I want to be a pastry chef. And then I'm just like, no, that's not possible. We're an insurance tech startup. And we just shut it down and you're not building trust. So this is a great way to, if you're not comfortable having complex conversations, trying to get out of some sticky questions to be able to be straightforward and honest. The other framework is squishier. And there's nothing, I'm sure you've done some other format, or maybe you follow this format, but I call this peeling back the onion. So in one-on-ones, weekly one-on-ones, one best practice we have at Policygenius, and I know this happens at other companies, is to check in your one-on-ones. I know Garrison's going to talk more about how to have effective one-on-ones, but you'll start out with, how are you doing on a 1 to 10 scale? And I flip the scale to make people think. So 10 is severely bad, you want to run out the door, and then 1 is perfect utopia, no complaints. And we just see where the person sits on the scale in that moment, and we start tracking it in the one-on-ones to see if there are trends, but we also start unpacking that. So if somebody says there are 5, and you need to understand calibration for what that individual, how that individual approaches the 1 to 10 scale. But if somebody says there are 5, then I might say, why are you 5, and what would it take to get you to a 4? Again, 1 is perfect utopia. So we're starting to unpack what is going on in that person's head and how they're feeling, and you can start to peel back those layers by asking open-ended questions to get to the core. It's really easy, and you can start to look at trends. So there have been times where I might be working with a team member and I've seen they've hovered around the 5 to 6 range for a number of weeks, and that's concerning, right? You want to figure out how can we get out of that zone. If somebody's going to the 7, 8, 9 zone constantly and they're just sitting there, it's really hard to unwind. And then that's when narratives start building and people start running for the hills. And then we go back to the 2-year tenure that people are experiencing at their company. So this is a way to de-escalate a situation, and if you already know that you're doing that check-in with somebody, then it makes it less awkward for them, because it's already hard if they're on the high end of that scale, on the deep end, then it's going to be hard for them to even figure out how to articulate how they're feeling. So help them out a little bit by creating that structure and predictability, so there's not as much that they need to overcome, and just having that conversation. So that's another way to peel back the onion. And the reason I think this ties back to performance management is because if you start to understand and connect with the employee more and understand how they're feeling, then they're going to trust you more, and then you can have some of those deeper conversations. Any questions?
First of all, I love your graphics, but
stole them.
Okay. You mentioned you were opening up an office in North Carolina, so I'm assuming it's a different culture. I'm assuming, how is that integration, and how do you brand your brand and your culture in New York and transpose that to North Carolina, or do you just completely do another culture from North Carolina? And then if that's the case, so there's two different cultures, how do you integrate those two cultures into one company and have the same goals?
Yeah, we're asking ourselves that same question. Durham, our Durham office is quite new. We're still huddled in a WeWork as we build out an office from the ground up. But I think one thing that helps that we came up with is a community team. So we had an application process and then had quite a few applicants and then reviewed the applications and chose 5 individuals from across the company to serve as our beacons of culture. And they travel every quarter to the location to get to know the employees there and come up with great ideas on how we can make sure we're bridging the gap on the 2 offices. We've also, and this can vary by company and how they're approaching a second office build out. It can be for a number of reasons why a company has to do that. We're doing it to try to tap into a new talent pool and have a dual growth plan. It's going to be a little stressful, but it's less around, hey, we're going to like shift everybody to another office location to reduce costs. So luckily for us, we're able to relocate people. So we've relocated quite a few people who want a warmer climate and to have more space and quality of life. So that's helped us too, to have transplants there to help grow that office. And then we've got a rotation of people who are traveling around every week from the company to do that. But I don't think the plan is to replicate exactly what we have in New York City. There are different people there. We want that unique talent. So we're learning some of the nuances about that location, and it can start to have its own culture manifest geographically. I hope that helps, but I can talk to you more about it afterward. Okay.
All right, thank you. Very great content. One question: how do you approach training managers to have effective one-on-ones, to do or give effective feedback, to listen to their employees? How do you approach that?
Yes, so we do manager training, and we partner with Life Labs on that. They're fantastic when it comes to management training. The way they deliver it is just in the voice that a way that people can relate to it at our company. So we do that, and we make sure that we have a goal that every new manager goes through that training. The other thing we do whenever somebody is hired and they're a people manager, or if they've progressed to people manager, we give them a quick nuts and bolts training on how to manage PTO when you have a flexible PTO plan, how to manage all the nuts and bolts of the admin side of management training. So we do that immediately, so that doesn't go awry. And then we do office hours where managers can come and chat with the people team, and we do a lot of very personalized and curated trainings for performance reviews, for example, how to have comp review conversations, all those things to make sure. And we do them repeatedly because training isn't everything, but we try to do that along with side-by-side, real-time problem solving.
What is the frequency that you think performance review should, for a company-wide policy?
It really depends on the size of the company and what you have in place. So when I first joined Policygenius, I was the 20th employee, and they wanted to roll out performance reviews quickly, but we could have rolled them out. People didn't know what they were being measured against, so it didn't really make sense. It was going to erode trust and lack of belief in a performance management program. So we built out our rubrics first, vetted them past the team members so they could be bought into what we were measuring them against, and they had an understanding and could ask questions. And then we did reviews later. But it can really depend on the size and stage and scale of the company, how often, because I would say we've rolled out, since I've been there, 9 performance review cycles, and we've changed the cadence every year. I've been at Policygenius for 4 years. We've changed them every year based on feedback from the company and how much lift it is in calendaring and everything. So it really depends. It depends who you have in place. If you don't have enough people managers and leaders in place, then you can imagine how long that will take to roll something out. So I don't have the best answer. I would say what I saw when I joined early on is people wanted more frequent touch points because Everything, like very early stage startups are just running all over the place, and it's so ambiguous, it's hard to have any idea of how am I doing, because you're running around with chickens with your heads cut off, like chickens with your heads cut off. So we did them every 6 months with midpoint check-ins. And then we got to a point in scale where we had everything built, and then we switched to doing them 3 times a year. And then we moved back to quarters, and now this year we're going to shift it again. So it depends with scale, but I'm happy to talk with you offline about where you're at your company, and we can see what works.
Awesome. Thank you, Cindy. Let's give you a huge round of applause. That was great.